Hi, I'm Jill Vitale Awesome with the Eden Alternative. Thanks for joining us today for the Eden Alternative Live. I'm really excited about today's show. We are going to have a very important conversation about the pandemic and how communities are maneuvering, navigating their way through this really challenging situation. It's one of the most challenging situations our field has ever faced. I know my two guests will agree with that. And so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about how a large multi-site organization with really all the levels of living, nursing homes, life plan community, assisted living, independent living, memory support, adult day services have navigated their way through it and what they have learned. So my guests today are Pat McBride, and Pat McBride is the Vice President of Clinical and Compliance at Cappella Living Solutions and Christian Living Communities, based in Denver, Colorado, actually Centennial, Greenwood Village, Colorado, but in the Denver area. And Pat has more than 35 years experience in leadership, nursing leadership. I met Pat years ago at Claremont Park, where I was the executive director, and Pat came in as a consultant to help us through some regulatory challenges. And then she joined the organization and has had some really important projects that she did. Some of the things that you've heard about through the Eden Alternative. One is Pat developed a really successful mentorship program for nursing assistants and nurses that had ended up with 1 year team member retention rates of 75% to 95%, which is huge. And Pat also came on, we did a webinar with Pat earlier this year to talk about her project with the Leading Age Leadership Academy. Her project was the Sleepover Project, where every member of the Christian Living Communities leadership team spent a night in one of their communities and what they learned from that. So Pat has made a huge impact on our field. Thrilled to have you here, Pat.
Thank you, Jill. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. And then we also have Moriah Bernhardt. And Moriah is a professional licensed therapist, a registered art therapist, and she's also an Eden Alternative educator. I should have mentioned also that Pat McBride is a certified Eden associate, but Moriah has taught a lot of Eden Alternative classes. She has worked in the field of elder care, dementia education, and older adult quality of life program development for over 14 years. Moriah is the Senior Director of the Rhythms programs at Christian Living Communities and Cappella Living Solutions. And I used to work with Moriah years ago at Claremont Park, and she really was behind the incredible cultural transformation of that community, creating inclusivity, very age positive and ability inclusive community. That was really awesome. So Moriah, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Jill. It's a pleasure.
I'm so happy to have both of you here. I know you've learned a lot through your experience, and one of the things that I love about working with both of you and about Cappella Living Solutions and Christian Living Communities is I think you guys always acknowledge, that there are always opportunities to learn and grow. And when you said you were willing to come and talk with our audience today about, not just the success stories, but some of the things that you learned. And this has been a time of learning, right? Because this is an unknown. And so up front, I want to acknowledge and thank you for being candid with the group. I think when other people can learn, when you say, hey, this didn't go perfectly, but here's what we learned, it helps other people to come along as well. So let's start a little bit. Pat, if you could, just so people who are watching understand what your organization is and kind of what you do, I think that'll help to set the stage. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, Jill. So Christian Living Communities has been serving seniors in Denver area since 1972. So for over 45 years, if my math is correct. We have 3 legacy communities in the Denver area: Claremont Park, Summer and Glen, and Holly Creek. And then we've expanded out to Cappella Living Solutions, which manages and consults with other communities. So we currently are in 23 different communities in 6 different states. So our states are Colorado, Ohio, Indiana, Oklahoma, Utah, and Texas. And we serve seniors in various settings. So we have CCRCs. We also have assisted living, memory care neighborhoods. We have residential living. We serve adult day programs, as well as home care. So we touch seniors in various different settings. So it's been very challenging since there's not a lot of federal guidance around COVID, that most of the guidance and direction is from the state level, and then also from each county and county health departments. So we've had to try to navigate through all of this for all the various states that we serve and all the various scopes of practices that we serve. So it's been a little bit tricky.
Absolutely. I can't imagine navigating this in one community, let alone, how many states did you say you're in now?
We're in 6.
In 6 states.
And so they're all very different.
Yeah. And so you, from the very beginning, have been leading the charge with this, right? With the leadership team there on how are you going to handle things. And so do you want to talk a little bit about what that experience has been like? How are you approaching at the beginning? What's changed over time?
Well, I'm a nurse, as you can see, and when we found out that there was COVID and there was a pandemic, like most nurses, we took charge. We're like, not in our community. We are going to protect everyone from COVID. We're going to circle in the wagons and keep everyone safe. And in doing that, we really just got to work. We were little soldiers. We made sure we had all the policies in place, that everybody knew what needed to happen. We're gathering our troops, our staff. We're making sure that we had enough supplies. We were just ready. Nurses are trained and have experience on how to deal with emergencies. And this was one that none of us have ever experienced in our lives. It's such a global way. So we were really in our element and really made sure the wagons were rounded and everybody knew what to do. And the residents and the families seemed to appreciate that at that point. They were like, okay, we don't know what's going on, so please protect us. Please tell us what to do. Just keep this virus out of the community. And so that's how we started. And we kept that up for quite a while. And we, like probably almost everybody else on here, has had COVID in their communities. And I remember the first day we had a positive resident with COVID, I cried like a baby. In fact, probably most of the nurses did, because we weren't able to keep it out of our buildings. Yeah. And those were our marching orders. And, we knew it would probably come. We know how viruses work, but it was shocking to us because we wanted to take control and do what was right for our residents. So that's how we first dealt with it.
Yeah. And if anyone knows how to deal with an infectious disease, it's nurses, right? In nursing homes, in senior living. And this was so different.
Right. I mean, we thought, well, we have flu, we have neuro, we have MRSA. Oh, we can handle this, right? We have COVID. The common cold is a COVID virus. Right. And, they didn't know a lot about it at first. So we just thought, well, we'll put things into place and we know how to clean and we know how to, don and doff PPE and keep people safe. And we did for quite some time, but this is like nothing we've ever seen before. And it just took over.
Right. Absolutely. And I just want to acknowledge the people that are out there watching. Please pop in the comment box. Let us know that you are here. And also Pat and Moriah will be able to answer questions too. So please join in the conversation as we talk with Pat and Moriah here today. So what have you all, and Moriah, do you want to add anything to that, to what Pat was just talking about?
Yeah, I'll just, I'm kind of a newbie. I returned to the organization mid-April it was. So we're the heightened state, crisis mode. And I just remember how everybody was on edge. We had outbreaks. People were exhausted, and yet within that, we had such an amazing team. And Pat, I just want to recognize you for your insightful leadership, because we were able to also pause towards the end of April and think, okay, this is going to be for a while. And how are we going to work with this, while also acknowledging that this has really impacted quality of life for people? So that's really what triggered some of our changes. Even though it's baby steps, but from some different approaches on how to bring balance to the whole health, safety, and well-being of people. So I just want to recognize that it does take some time to pause and recognize, yes, this is crisis, but because this is going to be for such a long time, we need to change our approach.
Yeah, and I think from watching kind of from the outside with this, at first it seemed like, well, maybe this will just be a short-term thing, right? And having all these restrictions, you can handle it for a short time, but it's going to be going on for quite a while, right? For the foreseeable future. So what are the, one or two biggest lessons that you have learned along the way?
Go ahead, Moriah.
Okay. So one of the things that we really recognize that I think would resonate with many communities that have gone through Eden trainings is that, we were experiencing decision fatigue after a while, that we had so many decisions that we had to make on the fly as new information came in. After a while, it just emotionally was exhausting to people. Also, many of the decisions that were made were as if it was wartime decision. So it was top down. It came from an organizational point of view, and very paternalistic. And we recognized that. And at that time, we also recognized that it was necessary in order to keep people safe. But again, once we paused and paid attention to how we have been doing things and how it's affecting people, we really decided to shift and pivot and start looking at how we can include other people in that decision making as well. Pat, what else would you add to that?
I would agree. We were definitely large and in charge in the beginning. My small and mighty clinical team were the experts. Nobody would do anything without asking us. We were just saying yes and no, and just getting things taken care of. And then, then we realized, as Jill said, that this is not going away. This isn't just a month. This is going to be around for a while. And I started seeing exhaustion in my team's faces. And I felt like we were keeping people healthy, but at what cost? And there was a point where the pendulum was way over here with keep people really healthy, but we had to get back more towards the middle where we were also affecting happiness, because people can be healthy from not having the virus, but they can wither on the vine from not having social isolation or not being able to have a fulfilling, purposeful life.
Yeah.
And we really had to work on that, because you can't bubble wrap people. None of us are bubble wrap. We've all left our homes. We've all gone to the grocery store. Many of us have eaten out. It's a risk. What is your risk appetite? And at first it wasn't, we were not going to take any risk. We were going to deal with it. Yeah. But then we decided we have to get more into the middle, because this will be a long time and people cannot survive.
Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge for people who are watching who may not, have been working in this environment, is it made sense, right? You had to act fast and make those decisions. And while information is coming in, you're trying to just do the best you can to keep people safe. And, Penny, I was talking with Penny Cook from Pioneer Network about this whole kind of situation that organizations are in. And she said, that all makes sense. And now is the time to pause, as Moriah said, pause and think about things. And what you talked about, Pat, we've been for 25 years with the Eden Alternative talking about how people who are institutionalized suffer from loneliness, helplessness, and boredom. And, surplus safety measures where we in essence bubble wrap people up and try to have nothing happen to them often leads to that, right? And impacts quality of life. So there's a question from Denise Hyde, and I'll give you a second to think about this, but if you could go get a do-over from the start, and this is right, hindsight is 2020, but if you could get a do-over from the start, what would you have done differently from the beginning?
Well, I don't think there's a lot that we could have done much differently at the beginning because we were so restricted with the guidance. With the state surveys and all those, it was very punitive. I don't think I would have done much differently. I probably would have listened a little more to the residents and asked questions. Some of them probably would have told us what was going on, but really most of them at that point in the beginning were do what we have to do to stay safe. Right. But I think we probably could have listened earlier than what we did. And one of the things that I found myself doing when we started to say, whoa, we better slow down, we better, let the pendulum swing to the middle. And that was our clinical team actually came up with that. We said, we need to do this. But when we started to do stuff, I felt myself say, and I actually did this at quite a few meetings, I got defensive with people and I would say, you know what, we save lives as clinical teams. So you need to know that it was important that we were there and took care of things, but now it's different. So I think that maybe it took me a little longer to get where I needed to go based on being a nurse, probably. And wanting to protect people.
I always appreciate you, Pat, and you're so just honest, and you're always looking at how am I going to learn and grow. So thanks for saying that, because I don't know if a lot of people would be able to say that, and I think it's awesome. And you're a great influence and leader for other people to learn from with that. Moriah, what about you? Anything you would add to that?
No, I mean. Honestly, it's the leaders that, like Pat, that take a moment to recognize that things could be different, that really inspire, I think, others to think the same. I think because the information was so new, we didn't know anything about this back then. That's how it had to be for a little bit in the beginning to protect people. I agree with Pat. I do think that we are recognizing that having residents and team members and also our executive directors part of the conversation, we are expecting to have another wave of COVID coming up in the fall. And we're asking them now about, should this come back, how would you recommend that we proceed?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's a really big piece for our movement forward.
Absolutely. And I should also point out, I'm a family member of, my parents live at one of the communities that is part of Christian Living Communities. And I was so happy the day my dad said they've closed down the dining room and no visitors are allowed, because exactly what you said, Pat, right? Because I was terrified. And so I was very thankful as a family member, and my parents were too, that you all took those actions that you did. So what other things have you learned? How has the culture of your organization impacted this journey? What have you learned about the universal worker model? What other things have helped you all get through this time and learn from this?
One of the things I think we all have learned is the importance of caring for those who care for the residents, caring for those who are caring, because really sometimes that's all we can do as leaders. And we got very creative around that. We, like many of us, have hero pay, incentive pay. We also have developed what we call a universal worker. And that was actually through our dining program, because as you know, many dining rooms and restaurants were closed. And there were a lot of people that were unemployed looking for some help, for some work. And so we hired them and helped train them to do all the things that were non-licensed jobs for the nurses and the CNAs, such as, tidying up the room, delivering trays, helping the residents learn how to use an iPad, how to talk to their families, how to keep them engaged. So that universal worker was really a godsend for us. So that the nurses and CNAs, who became busier and busier the more we had COVID cases or a lot of PPE issues, that they were able to do what they specifically needed to do. We also, being a Christian organization, have a great support with chaplains, and we really utilize that. So there were prayer lines that people would get on when a community had COVID, and the nurses and the CNAs and the staff members and families and leadership, we'd all get on and pray for that community. The chaplains had hours where anyone could call and talk to them. Jim Cocker, our senior chaplain, did a blessing of the hands for all of the nursing leaders, and then for all of the community nurses that wanted it. So it's a lovely procedure where he blesses the caregiver's hands and helps show how appreciative and how powerful those caregiver hands are. At Claremont Park, we had an open adult daycare center. And so that was turned into a childcare center for the workers at Claremont Park, because they couldn't come in and work because no one was taking care of their children. So that was hugely successful in helping us to deal with COVID. The other thing that really blew my mind, because we've done a lot of what worked and what didn't. And one of the things that always rises to the top is the importance of making sure people are well fed. I mean, the Jewish grandmother, it comes out of me, but the more you make sure people are well fed, the better off they are to be able to take care of people. And it's not only feeding them during when they're working, but we also prepared meals for them to take home to their families.
That's awesome.
So that they could just pop it and heat it up and take care of their families. Because the last thing they wanted to do after 12 hours of putting on and off PPE was to fix a healthy meal for their family. We're also doing a lot of education around trauma and around self-care, making sure our teams know that, it's important to get your sleep and not rely on, a lot of wine at night, or, making sure, I know, I said a lot. One glass will work, but not a lot. The importance of getting up and taking a walk at lunch and all those really important things that we were doing. And in the beginning, we had meetings round the clock, didn't we, Moriah? I mean, we had meetings from 8 o'clock to 7, Zoom meetings, go-to meetings. We'd have them at lunchtime. And finally, somebody said, we are not walking the talk. We're telling people that they need a break. And we're having a 12 to 1:30 meeting every single day. Yeah. Not okay. So we had to learn some of the lessons the hard way.
Yeah.
But those are some of the lessons that I learned, how important it is to take care of the people that are taking care.
Yeah. And I've done some interviews with life enrichment, community life, and dementia care associates, and all of them across all of our communities are saying we couldn't have done this if we didn't have an all hands on deck attitude, where everybody covers whatever needs to be covered. And so we've had housekeeping and life enrichment doing hair for folks, and we've had CNAs delivering meals, and we've had nurses doing family virtual chats with residents. So that really is what is needed during this crisis. But it's also a very good thing to consider as we move past this crisis as well. Is this a new model that we want to continue developing past coronavirus? So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to add for lessons is that we really understood the power of family by the loss of family presence in our communities. And so a lot of the feedback that we have gotten, especially from residents, is that family really, even though some residents are living in a setting that provides 24-hour care, families really filled in the gaps in some of those needs for residents. And so when you removed family and their ability to come in, whether it's on a daily basis or weekly, we saw those gaps come into fruition right in front of us. And so that's another aha moment from this whole experience.
It's not like this extra, it's part of an individual's well-being, and it's as essential as all the healthcare provisions we do.
And not just for emotional. I mean, family members would come in and do people's hairs. They would do their laundry, a whole bunch of stuff, because people were more comfortable with that. It's not that it wasn't offered.
Another thing that we found that was essential that you brought that up, Jill, were pets. We, I think if I were to do another thing over, I would make sure that we classified pets as essential from the beginning. We kind of, locked up the doors and said, if you have to have a pet walker, too bad about you. And that is just not, that was not a good decision.
Animals, especially for it makes a big difference for people. And I really like what you had said, Moriah, and I think I'm hearing this in some of the other things that Pat is saying too, is what will you learn from this? And like the thing about breaking down silos, there are probably some really good lessons there about, and I know you've been working for a long time to break down silos. Like, that's not my job, and I work in dining services, so I can't do this. So how do you have thoughts on how to continue that mindset? Like, how do you just not, I know we'll never go back to an old normal, but how do you take those lessons and move forward with them, do you think?
I mean, we have an opportunity as an organization to change that. I mean, it's also from changing job expectations and descriptions. It's retraining people with those new expectations. It's also referring to our successes and say, look what we've done. It was successful. So if this is working, why don't we continue with this model?
Right. What are your biggest challenges right now? Like, we've been talking about what has been happening. What's happening? Like, what's causing you stress right now? What's stressing the organization right now, would you say?
Well, we're in a unique pause right now. So we only have a little bit of testing being done in a couple of our communities. So right now, knock on wood, we have no COVID in our communities. What we're finding is that our teams are a little what I call frozen. They're just in shock, I think. They're traumatized. There's a little PTSD going on. And I think some vicarious trauma also. And so they want to, as much as we're trying now to bring it back down to the community and let the community make decisions, we'll give them the template. Like, these are the rules around outdoor visitations, right? This is what the state CDC is telling us. Now make it your own by following this. We're giving them the template. And we're trying to get the communities to talk to their residents and say, okay, where do you want to have the visit? Where is this a shady area? How long do the visits need to be? Should there be a dog in the visit? All those kind of questions, right? That should be the community's decision. Mm-hmm. And they are, some of the communities are like, okay, we got it, right? But we knew those communities. Claremont Park is one of those, Jill. But other ones are kind of like, we want you to tell us what to do. You've told us what to do before. We've kept COVID out of the community. You did really good, so keep it up. And that's not the point where we're at in this crazy journey that we're in. And so to get them to make their own decisions has been really hard. They don't want to make a mistake.
Yeah,
They're fearful of making a mistake. It's very risky. The odds are huge.
Yeah.
So some of our communities, I'm calling it frozen. They just want us to continue. And, some of the residents are the same way. Just tell us what to do. So we're trying to break that comfort level.
Yeah, and that if anybody's watching who's at a community, are other people feeling that what Pat described as being frozen? And so please feel free to drop your comments in the comment box about that. We're getting some questions coming in too. But one of the from a family member perspective, I think one of the I can imagine would be a really challenging thing right now is things are opening up, right? And okay, go out, social distance, wear a mask, but try to get back to some normal life. But if you're over this age, you should still be self-isolating. And so people that live in communities are seeing family members and friends that aren't living in a community doing things. But if you live in a congregate setting, this is one of the really challenging things is you're not just accepting risk for yourself, you're impacting all these other people too, which is, normally when we say, hey, the risk is all yours, Moriah, if you want to do that and it's not good for your health and you know the risk and you do it, great. But now you're potentially putting other people at risk. So, wow, what a challenging time.
It really is, especially when you have communities where residential and assisted living are physically close to each other or sometimes mingled, or the culture in one of our communities, the culture is that RL and AL mix together and you don't know who is who. Mm-hmm. But now we have, RL by regulation can pretty much do what they need to do, right? Wear masks.
It's an apartment, right? Residential living. So people
living, right? And they have their own choices they can make. Assisted living and skilled are much higher regulated, more highly regulated, and there's more, risks around that, and they're surveyed. So under one roof, you can have people living under different situations.
Yeah, that's big. Moriah, what about you? What's challenging right now and thoughts on all this?
I mean, from a community life perspective, pretty much everything that made a community special, or what we think in traditional terms, came to a halt, right? Especially that whole social interaction that brought people together. So we've really had to be creative, as many other communities, on how to meet those needs. And of course, we wouldn't meet them as in normal times, but we've had to be creative about how do we provide the kind of the basics of the antidotes to loneliness, helplessness, and boredom, with a very limited group of people. At this point, we still have families, we still have counselors and other people from the outside having those virtual connections, but it is different than having that physical connection too.
Yeah. And there's a question that came up. And I wanted to before that, I want to pull up a comment from Denise that it's not surprising people are frozen because a mistake could be deadly with this virus.
Yeah.
And there's a lot on the line. Beth Sanders asked, do you think there's a need for more people in the outside community to engage with residents? What do you do when residents don't have outside visitors?
That's a great question. We actually, previous to COVID-19, a lot of our communities had intergenerational connections as well with high schools and colleges. And so several of our communities have set up virtual buddies with younger folks to communicate with some residents that may not have family or family in town. But I have to say that we have also recognized another lesson is that technology has really opened up connections with so many other people that we probably wouldn't have connected with otherwise before. So that's another piece. Again, it's finding that balance of what do you take out of this really awful situation,
Yeah.
and how do you shift it back to well-being? So,
and that's one of the things we're really seeing is, and I know that in your organization you don't think this way, but there's so much of that, old dogs can't learn new tricks, and these people can never learn technology. And right now we're seeing it happen. And I know at your organization, growth is a big part of who you are, and has always been part of who you are. But right, people, it's limiting beliefs that we have of people, and it's being shifted quite a bit right now because of necessity. So hopefully there'll be more of that to come. So this, one of the interesting things, former CEO of Christian Living Communities, Russ Denbraver, used to say, it's called risk management, not risk elimination, whenever we would talk about risk. And he'd be like, you can't eliminate all risk. And I think this right now is a perfect example of that, right? You and Pat, you said in the beginning that we did everything we could, and COVID still got in. It's, so how are you looking at risk now? What are your thoughts on that? And I know if you would talk a little bit about how you are engaging residents and with your health and happiness committee, that'd be awesome if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So we, during our pause and our root cause, we realized that despite every effort, despite being great Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and being totally prepared and getting everything written up and done, it still came. So the lesson that we learn is that there's certain things we cannot control. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard lesson to learn, right? And COVID-19, I mean, you can control it to some degree, but quite often you can't. And as I said earlier, we can't bubble wrap people, and we can keep them healthy by keeping the virus out, but there's other aspects also. And we have to consider the whole being, the whole social being, as well as the physical, emotional, spiritual being. So that's our lesson. And one of the things that we're going to consider when and if this does rear its ugly head again in our communities is looking at what we're calling quarantining. So having people pick their team to quarantine with. There's a member on our we call it the small and mighty clinical team, who is single and she lives alone. And she said it was so difficult for her that next time, if this hits Denver again, she and a friend are going to quarantine together. Mm-hmm. And we thought, well, maybe we should offer that in our community so that the people have someone to dine with, someone to visit in their home, someone to play games with, to converse with, not just go in your room and close the door. So that's something I think might be really powerful if and when this should happen again. And
to add to that, Pat, we also have residents that are talking about really developing buddy system programs. So being able to check in on a neighbor or a designated buddy, and make sure that you have a way to communicate, a way to socialize. So we have residents that are initiating all these pieces in preparation in case this happens again, which is really empowering. It's really cool to see. And then another piece that we're also looking at, and several of our communities are really integrating this into their processes, is learning circles, obviously coming also from the Eden Alternative. There are certain decisions that we may not be able to have residents make for the whole organization, but we know that if we involve people in conversations, in sharing ideas and opinions, that in itself really brings back the power to folks. They've always had it, but in a way, in this time, we've taken it away. Mm-hmm. So starting with those small learning circles, conversations, we have a community that talks about, what do you want to have on the menu? You know, let's go back to what we can do, and let's go back to the things that we can control. And that's really bringing back that sense of we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Residents and communities.
Yeah, our language really has changed from not what you can't do, the restrictions, the limitations. We talk about what can you do.
Yeah.
And I didn't answer your question, Jill. I'm sorry about health and happiness. I got down another rabbit hole. But we created a committee called the Health and Happiness Committee. And that came out of the clinical meeting, because we had a discussion about we can keep people healthy, but we have to also be concerned about their happiness. Mm-hmm. And so we created this committee it's called the Health and Happiness Committee. And shortly after we created it, we realized, thanks to Moriah and her wisdom, that we needed residents on the committee. So we have representatives on the committee, and we talk about things like, okay, we're going to open up the dining rooms based on the Colorado restrictions about spacing and, reservations. And what do you think? Which dining rooms do you think should open? How should that happen? And they got so excited. They told us that church services were extremely important, and we needed to put that on the top of the list about getting those started. However, we have to do that. And they had great ideas about outdoor services and video streaming them, and bringing them to small groups less than 10. And just the group has been amazing. But what we learned too is that, again, it was the corporate office and 3 very lovely residents that were really passionate about this, making decisions for our communities. So now we're trying to move it down to the community level, where they can have their own group of team members and residents determining, what does church look like for them? How are they going to walk all those dogs that need help? Where are they going to set up the visitations outside? How are they going to continue with RL and AL integration in one specific community without making people feel ostracized? And then it also, Jill, it also helps them determine what their risk appetite is. Because it's different for everybody. Mm-hmm. And the families have different ideas. And the residents, of course, have different risk Some communities are like, no, this is too fast. We are not okay with this. Mm-hmm. Others are like, open the doors as soon as we can. But we should not be telling them what risk they should be taking.
Well, and there's such a difference. And one of the things that has really become clear is that this pandemic is not a leadership challenge, it's a community challenge. Mm-hmm. And there is no way that a group of corporate, and I don't mean corporate, a group of people that are responsible for all these communities can have all the answers, or the executive director or the dining services director. And in these communities, there's thousands of years of life experience, mm-hmm. right? And the more people are engaged in making those decisions, it doesn't feel like a jail, right? It doesn't feel like all these rules coming down. It's, hey, we decided this because this is what matters to us at this community. So that's awesome. And Moriah, I don't know if you would share, there was a particular community that said, we don't want visitors yet, right? But it was their decision.
Uh-huh. Yep. I mean, all of our communities are taking it in different strides for sure. So some of them were like, hold the fort. We're not ready for this yet. And some, like Claremont Park, is more about, okay, we got to move forward. So how are we going to do it together? And yes, I am my brother and sister's keeper. So I have to pay attention to that. So there's definitely that. So we recognize that, but logistically too, if you're thinking about it, we have communities in 6 different states. And they all have different needs. And so that was a nightmare to try to like manage from a, protocol and procedure and all of regulatory stuff. So we have started doing a lot of training with executive directors on how to bring those decisions. I mean, this is a prime example of decision rings, right? Back to the community. But you can't just say, oh, it's up to you guys. You have to give people the training and the tools to make those good decisions. Right?
Yes. And the conditions of empowerment, right? That we teach about with the Eden Alternative, all those things have to be there. Wow. You are all so wise and to just, and so I want to first invite our people who are watching to pop any questions they have in the question box. But I want to ask, while we're waiting for that, I want to ask you both this question. We know from our work with the Eden Alternative that empowering people can be really scary, right? When you're a leader, when you're a former leader and it's your job to do these things, it's scary enough in a normal time. But what advice would you give to other people who are watching this, who are like, I kind of like what they're saying, but I'm terrified to give up control? What advice would you give to people?
Well, I remember when I had the epiphany that I didn't know everything and that I needed to ask other people. I had a decision freeze. I remember I was in the conference room and I was making decisions for about a month. And something came up right before a town hall meeting. And it was a decision I had to make. And I was with probably 5 other people, socially distanced.
And these are the town hall meetings with family members?
Right.
Okay.
And I could not make the decision. I literally physically froze. And I remember one of my friends said, it's okay, Pat, you don't have to make all the decisions. And I felt so relieved that I can trust my team to start making decisions. So I guess my advice would be trust your team. They know what they're doing. They wouldn't be in the positions they are. And, they're going to make mistakes, and allow them to make mistakes. We all made mistakes along the way. But giving people the power gives them what they need to get through this.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it also relieves a lot of pressure off of you. And know that they'll always have their back, because they're always going to want to call you and say, I want to run this by you. What do you think of this? And, I'm still getting quite a lot of that, and that's okay. It's still their decision. I'm just helping them feel comfortable with it. So that would be my advice.
That's awesome, Pat. Thank you. Moriah, what about you?
I mean, decisions sharing has been kind of the foundation of my work, and, being an Eden educator, that's a big piece. When we talk about leadership, it's not often the one person in front of the team, the crowd, the herd. It's really about working together and taking turns and asking the people around you, because who knows, your CNA, your housekeeper, your life enrichment might have a better answer, might have that answer that can really solve something that nobody else has thought of. So I think that's the beauty of teamwork and team leadership, I guess I would call. And that includes also residents. That's why it was so important for us to invite residents to our decision making.
Absolutely. I love that that really is pushing decision making closer to the elders, right? And those that are closest to them. That is exactly what you're doing right now. And kudos to you. But I have to think that your experience with doing this and the culture of your organization, and I want to think that the Eden Alternative that you all have been engaged with so long has helped, because I can't imagine like a traditional top-down organization, how hard that would be to make that shift.
Right. Our culture is to, empower the elders to make their own decisions, for sure. And it surprised me how easy it was to be paternalistic again. They're easy shoes to put on during a crisis.
Institutional dragon, right? The institutional dragon roaring back.
Right. And they were, easy to put on and button up. But I think at the time they were important, but it's time to take them off too. And knowing when to do that is really important.
Wow. How did you know it was the right time to do that?
For me, it was when I started seeing people's health be deteriorating based on isolation, et cetera, not following the Eden alternative principles or not allowing an environment for those to thrive. That's really when it started.
And I'll be honest, mine is a little different. I started again, like halfway through this, like when the crisis was really raging. And I had just left our Department of Public Health as a state surveyor. And I just remember coming in and we were frozen. I mean, I remember talking to our clinical team and at some point I said to one of my colleagues, wait a sec, we do know that this is all interpretive, that we can interpret things in different ways. And so I think that was also for me a way of thinking, I always know that we have to look at well-being as part of health, right? Yeah. But as a way to look at the massive directives and regulatory restrictions, I think that was when I was like, wait, this is part of it is our interpretation too. So I think that also helped with some of the new protocols, procedures, and lessening of some of the restrictions.
That makes a lot of sense, Moriah. And your experience as a surveyor, definitely.
Yeah.
I would also add, though, that surveyors will come in and they'll put their thumb down on you. Yeah. And it depends on the county. It depends on the state. One of the things that I think leadership needs to do is say, you know what, we'll take that tag. It's okay.
Yes.
And we've done that a few times just by saying, you know what, we're doing the right thing. Yep. And so what?
Yeah.
Wise leadership.
Support that.
Wise leadership. There is a question from Famada. I support the sentiments of both Pat and Moriah, but how do we navigate through the crisis when Eden eyes get clouded? Which is a really awesome way to ask that question, right? Are there Eden eyes in the way we see the world? And that's interesting, right? It's easy to get them clouded. So any thoughts on her question?
I think one of the ways that we have done it is to look at the things like Pat mentioned that we can do at this point. And really, and if it's not clear, go to the person who knows, how to decipher these things, to clear those things up, whether it's your quality assurance person, whether it's your DON, whoever that person who helps to interpret those guidelines and directives. So that's one of the things I would say, look at the things that you can do at this point.
And maybe looking at all the principles and how can we do this right now rather than we can't do this and we can't do that. I like that a lot, Moriah.
Yeah.
I would also add that it's hard to see things clearly when you're right in the middle of it. Yeah. So to step back, take a long weekend, really rejuvenate yourself, look at things with different eyes or invite other people to look at them. I can't tell you how many family dinners I had where we talked about things and my family members would say, have you considered this? Or that's a shame, maybe. And just having other eyes look at things, ask the residents, and we may have different view than we do, but stepping away from the crisis to be able to see clearer, I think is really important.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. Well, thank you both. I could keep talking to you for hours. Thank you for sharing the things that you've learned with us and your insight and your wisdom. This has been so great. And I know it'll be so helpful to so many other people and organizations. And if anybody out there is wanting to learn more about Christian Living Communities and Cappella Living Solutions, the websites are christianlivingcommunities.org and Cappella Living Solution or CapellaLiving.com. And what we didn't talk about is Cappella Living Solutions also does consulting work and management and helps organizations build new projects and does all kinds of great consulting work to help organizations improve their operations and their cultures. So Pat, Moriah, thank you. And thank you as a family member for doing such a great job. I know that you have, who knows if it'll be smooth sailing ahead, but it's great to know that you two are leading this charge to balance health and happiness. Thanks for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you, Jill. It's been a pleasure.
And for those of you out there watching, we will not be having a show on July 6th, but our next show on July 13th will be Ashton Applewhite, author of This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism, and with it, Parker Life Organization. So we'll be digging deep into ageism on July 13th. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you at the next show.